They all love me for my money. That is the only thing these women care about.
You're fired. Get out! Darling, you know I need a new bracelet.
Joel Vance stood in his high-rise office looking out over Atlanta, a city that belonged to him in more ways than most people could imagine. He had built an empire from nothing, a name that opened every door, a fortune that could buy almost anything. And yet standing there in the glow of a skyline he owned pieces of, he felt nothing but emptiness. It had been building for years, this quiet ache he never let anyone see. But it was the gala the night before that finally broke something in him. He had watched his fiancée Vanessa speak to a young waitress with a cruelty that made his stomach turn, dismissing her over a few minutes' delay with their drinks. Moments later Vanessa turned back to him with a sweetness that felt rehearsed, asking him to wire 6 figures into her boutique account so she could buy a bracelet she had seen earlier that week. Joel smiled and said he would take care of it the way he always did. But inside something cracked open. He looked around that room full of people laughing and toasting in his honor and understood, maybe for the first time with total clarity, that not one of them cared about him. They cared about what he could give them. He thought about his own life, the meetings, the mergers, the endless stream of people smiling at him because of what he was worth rather than who he was. He could not remember the last time someone had asked him how he was really doing and meant it. The next morning he called his vice president David into his office. He told him he was stepping away, that David would take over daily operations of Vance Global Ventures for the foreseeable future. David tried to talk him out of it, worried about the risk, the sheer strangeness of a man worth billions disappearing without warning. But Joel had already made up his mind. He locked his phone in a drawer, along with his credit cards and his identification, keeping only a small amount of cash folded into his pocket. That evening he stood in his closet full of tailored suits and chose instead a set of old clothes he had kept from years earlier, before the money, before the name. Worn denim, a faded jacket, boots that had seen real wear. He looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. For the first time in a long while, that felt like relief instead of loss. He left his car in the garage. He left the doorman behind. He walked out into the humid Atlanta night with nothing but the clothes on his back and a single question pressing on his mind. Somewhere out there, was there a single person in this world who could care about him without knowing a single thing about his money? He did not know yet how far that question would take him, or how much it would cost him to find the answer. But as he disappeared into the city he had built, Joel Vance felt something he had not felt in years. He felt free. For 3 days Joel wandered the West End with no plan and no shelter. He learned quickly that hunger was not an idea, it was a weight that sat in his chest and slowed his thinking. He learned that cold without a warm car waiting was a different kind of cold entirely. People stepped around him on the sidewalk without so much as a glance, and he began to understand, in a way no business lesson had ever taught him, exactly how invisible a man could become the moment he stopped looking useful. On the second afternoon he sat outside a glass tower downtown with a scrap of cardboard propped against his knee, too proud at first to write anything on it, then too hungry not to. A group of women in designer heels came out of the building laughing about something on one of their phones, and when they noticed him their laughter changed shape. They pointed. One of them covered her mouth and giggled behind her hand, another mimicked his hunched posture, and they walked on without ever once looking at him like he was a person instead of a joke to pass around. Joel kept his eyes down and said nothing. He had stood in rooms just like the one behind them 100 times, had probably shaken hands with someone who knew one of their fathers, and none of it mattered now. To them he was simply something to point at. What stayed with him longer than their laughter was what happened a moment later. A woman broke away from a different direction entirely, crouched down in front of him without a trace of hesitation, and pressed a bottle of water and a small bag of food into his hands. She did not flinch from the dirt on his sleeves. She did not look around first to see who might be watching her do it. She simply asked, gently, if he was okay and waited for an answer like it actually mattered to her. Her name was Monica. By the third night, rain came down hard over the West End transit station, and Joel found himself there again, soaked through, his hands shaking from cold. A battered pickup truck pulled up to the curb, headlights cutting long lines through the rain, and Monica stepped out carrying a box of warm meals, moving toward the small cluster of people sheltering nearby with the practiced ease of someone who did this often. She recognized him immediately and did not hesitate. She crossed to him, pressed a warm plate of food into his hands along with a dry towel, and looked at him the way almost nobody had looked at him in years, not with pity, not with suspicion, just plain human warmth. She told him the center always needed extra hands for repairs, and that if he wanted steady meals and a warm place to sleep, she could pay him fair wages for honest work. Joel accepted before he had even finished thinking it through. Sitting in the passenger seat of her truck minutes later, eating the first real meal he had in days, something in him went quiet in a way it had not in years. Nobody in that truck knew his name meant billions. Nobody was smiling at him because of what he could offer them. He had been given a plate of food and a dry towel by a stranger who expected nothing back, and it hit him harder than any deal he had ever closed. He did not know it yet, but that single act of kindness in the middle of a storm was about to change the direction of his entire life. The community center sat on a quiet block of the West End, a modest brick building with a patched roof and a garden out back that had clearly been someone's pride once. Monica introduced Joel to her father George, a steady, plain-spoken man who managed the center's daily affairs and welcomed Joel without a shred of suspicion, handing him a set of clean work clothes and pointing him toward a small guest room off the back hallway. Joel began working the next morning. He fixed hinges that had been sticking for years. He patched the section of roof that leaked every time it rained. He sanded down old donated furniture until it looked worth keeping. There were no assistants here, no meetings, no one to delegate to. Just his own 2 hands and the slow, unfamiliar satisfaction of watching something broken become whole again, one small repair at a time. Working beside Monica day after day, he began to learn the shape of her life. She told him about her mother, who had founded the center decades earlier with almost nothing, determined that no child on this block would go hungry or unsupervised after school. She told him, quietly one afternoon while they repainted a warped door frame, that she had been turning away vendors' invoices for 2 months because there wasn't enough in the account to cover them, and that some nights she lay awake doing the math over and over, hoping it would come out different. Joel listened. He offered ideas that sounded, to her, like simple common sense, a better way to structure the food donations, a small change to how they tracked expenses that would save real money by winter. He never told her where that thinking came from. But she noticed the sharpness behind his quiet, the way he solved problems most people would not even see. She began to wonder, without saying so out loud, who this man had been before he ended up sleeping under an awning in the rain. Neither of them said anything about what was growing between them. But it grew anyway, in the space between fixing a door and sharing a meal, in the small ordinary moments that neither of them had expected to matter this much. The longer Joel stayed, the heavier his secret became. It was easy at first, easy to let the days blur together, easy to let himself believe he had simply become the man in the work clothes fixing the roof. But every so often something would catch him off guard and remind him how far he had fallen from his old life, or how far his old life still reached for him. One Tuesday afternoon he stood in line at the hardware store 2 blocks from the center, a gallon of paint in each hand, waiting behind a man in a charcoal suit who was on his phone discussing a merger Joel had actually helped structure 2 years earlier from the other side of the table. The man's voice carried easily in the small store, casual and confident, the same tone Joel used to use himself without ever thinking about it. When the man finally turned around to pay, his eyes passed over Joel once, twice, a flicker of something crossing his face, a half-second of trying to place a face that didn't belong in old denim and paint-stained boots. Joel felt his pulse climb into his throat. He kept his eyes down on the paint cans and did not move until the man shook his head slightly, decided he was mistaken, and walked out the door still talking business into his phone. Joel stood there for a long moment after the bell above the door stopped ringing, his hands unsteady around the paint cans, his own name suddenly loud in his ears for the first time in weeks. He walked back to the center slower than usual that day, turning the moment over in his mind the whole way. It was nothing, he told himself. A stranger's second glance, nothing more. But it left a specific kind of fear behind, the fear of being recognized before he was ready, of Monica hearing the truth from anyone's mouth but his own. That night he sat on the edge of the narrow bed in the guest room and thought about the way Monica had looked at him that morning, handing him the keys to lock up after everyone left, trusting him with something she wouldn't have handed just anyone. He thought about how none of that trust had ever been given to Joel Vance the billionaire. It had been given to Joel, the man who fixed her roof and remembered how she took her coffee and stayed late without being asked. He wanted more than almost anything for that to be enough of an answer on its own. But sitting there in the dark, replaying the stranger's eyes lingering on his face a beat too long, he understood he was running out of time to decide that for himself. Sooner or later the truth would find its way to her, one way or another, and he needed it to come from him in his own words, while there was still a chance she might forgive the waiting. After a long day spent feeding families at the center, Monica and Joel sat together on the front steps as the sun went down over the West End, the sky sliding through orange and violet above the rooftops. The block had gone quiet, the way it always did at that hour, kids called in for dinner, porch lights flickering on one by one. Monica told him, without much preamble, that the center had felt different since he arrived, lighter somehow, and that she had caught herself thinking about him at odd hours of the day. She admitted, a little embarrassed by her own honesty, that she had started falling for his patience. The steadiness he brought into every room, the way he listened like what she said actually mattered. Joel felt something in his chest lift and break open at the same time. He was falling for her too, completely, and hearing her say it out loud made the truth he had been carrying feel unbearable to hold on to any longer. He knew, sitting there in the fading light, that he could not let this go any further without telling her who he really was. He took her hand, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all, the whole evening balanced on the edge of what he was about to say. He told her everything that evening, sitting right there on the steps where she had just told him her heart. He told her his real name, the company waiting for him a few miles away, the fortune he had walked away from the night of the gala, and the question that had driven him out into the streets in the first place, whether anyone could ever love him without knowing what he was worth. Monica sat very still while he spoke, and when he finished she did not say anything for a long moment. It was not anger that crossed her face first, it was something closer to disbelief, the strange vertigo of learning that the quiet, steady man she had grown to love was also someone the whole world already knew a very different version of. She asked him, quietly, why he hadn't told her sooner. Joel admitted he had been afraid that the moment she knew, everything between them would change, that she would start seeing dollar signs instead of him, the way everyone else always had. Monica told him, with a hurt in her voice she didn't try to hide, that keeping something this large from her for so long was its own kind of dishonesty, no matter how good his reasons were. She needed time to sit with all of it, she said, time to understand who he really was now that she knew the whole picture. She asked him gently for some space, not forever but for now. Joel gave her exactly what she asked for. He did not push, did not call, did not show up at the center uninvited. He rented a small room at a motel a few blocks over and kept working odd jobs around the neighborhood, refusing to disappear from the community even while he respected Monica's need for room to think. Every few days he would quietly drop off groceries or a small repair part for the center's aging van, never leaving a note, never asking for credit. He wasn't trying to win her back with gestures. He simply could not bring himself to stop caring about this place and the people in it, whether or not she was ready to let him back into her life. It was George who broke the silence first, catching Joel outside the hardware store one afternoon and telling him plainly that Monica missed him more than she was willing to admit out loud. He invited Joel to Sunday dinner, the way he always used to, and left the choice to walk through that door entirely up to him. Joel showed up that Sunday, unsure of the welcome he would find. Monica said very little when he walked through the door, but she set a plate for him without being asked, and that small, ordinary gesture told him more than any conversation could have. They talked that evening, carefully and honestly, about everything that had happened. Monica told him she understood now why he had been afraid, even if she still wished he had trusted her sooner. She told him what she needed going forward was not a grand apology but proof, steady and unremarkable, that he would keep choosing this life and these people even when nothing was owed to him and no one was watching. Joel agreed without hesitation. He did not try to buy his way back into her trust. He simply kept showing up, week after week, in the small, unremarkable ways that trust is actually built. And when the center's finances grew tight again as winter approached, he used his fortune quietly, not to impress her, but to establish a permanent community land trust for the West End, placing it under Monica and George's direction rather than his own name, so the neighborhood's future would never again depend on any one person's goodwill, his included. The real test came a few weeks later when David called the motel where Joel still kept a room, his voice tight with urgency. A crisis was unfolding at Vance Global Ventures, a deal on the verge of collapsing in a way that could cost hundreds of employees their jobs if it wasn't handled within the day, and only Joel had the relationships and the authority to fix it. Old habits rose in him fast, the instinct to disappear quietly and handle it the way he always used to, alone, without explanation. Instead he walked straight to the center and found Monica in the kitchen, and told her the truth before he did anything else, laying out exactly what was happening, what it would require, and that he needed to leave for the afternoon to make it right. He did not vanish and let her wonder. He did not treat her feelings as something to manage around. He simply included her, the way he hadn't known how to months earlier, and asked if that was all right. Monica studied him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of the old secrecy, and found none. She told him to go and to come back and tell her exactly how it went, all of it, the good and the bad. Joel spent the afternoon on borrowed phones and folding chairs in the center's back office, steering the deal through its final hours with David on the line, saving the jobs at stake without ever once considering staying in that world a moment longer than the crisis required. By evening he was back at the center, still in his work clothes, sitting across from Monica at the kitchen table walking her through everything that had happened, nothing held back. It was a small thing in the end, one afternoon and one honest phone call. But it was the first time his old life and his new one had touched without him hiding, and Monica understood, watching him choose to come back and tell her everything instead of letting her find out later, that this was the proof she had been waiting for without knowing exactly what it would look like. It was Monica who noticed months later that she had stopped waiting to see if he would disappear again. It was George who joked that the two of them had been engaged in everything but name for a while now. And it was on a warm evening at the community center, surrounded by the neighbors who had first taught Joel what it meant to be seen for who he actually was, that he asked her to marry him, plainly, without a single word left unsaid between them. She said yes without a moment's hesitation, because for the first time in either of their lives, there was nothing left to find out. Only each other, exactly as they were. Their wedding took place right there at the center months later, the same steps where a stranger had once knelt down with a bottle of water and a small bag of food now filled with people who called him family. Joel stood there holding Monica's hand and understood, finally, that losing everything he thought defined him was the only way he could have ever found what actually did.